Now we're going to be talking about today, which has to do with Mother's Day. And so we want to talk about Moses, not because Moses was a really good mother, but the fact is Moses had a good mother, right? So, and Moses' mother, like that's kind of weird. We don't even talk much about Moses' mother. Her name actually is only mentioned twice in the Old Testament, and she's not even named at all in the New Testament. But Moses' mother, the idea comes up quite a bit. So we want to look at a little bit of what a Moses' mother would look like, and maybe there's an encouragement for us, some help for us when we think about raising children, or mentoring children, or encouraging children, or even praying for children. And maybe you're a mother, maybe you're a grandmother. We want to wish you a great day, and we want to say that we appreciate all your work and all the things that you've done for the kids, your kids, and even for our kids. Some of the people here that are adults were raised by godly mothers and mothers that trained and taught their children. And that's a lot of times who we are today, partly because of their influence. And like to be honest, sometimes it was the things they didn't do so well that help us to be who we are today, and sometimes it's the things that they did well that we continue to follow their example and instill even into our children. So this is the idea of God's glory. Because in the Old Testament, God's glory comes up quite often. And if you remember, even with Moses, at one time he even wanted to see God's glory. You kind of wonder, when did he see God's glory? Well, we kind of saw God's glory at the burning bush. And he kind of saw God's glory when he went up to the mountain to get the Ten Commandments. And there was fire and clouds and thunder up in the mountain. That's God's glory. Well, as he led the people out of Egypt, he saw God's glory and all the powers of God that were happening. The plagues on the people and the separation of the waters and walking through on dry ground and being set free and escaping from not only captivity, but probably even death from the Egyptian soldier. That's God's glory. Now, you may be thinking about the time where Moses said, I want to see God's glory. And God said, well, you cannot see me face to face, but I will show you a piece of me, just a little glimpse of what I may look like, the glory and the power of God. So God was able to express and show and reveal his glory and his power to Moses really throughout his life. So we want to look at that a little bit more today, maybe in a little bit of a different way. In Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 23, as we look at the idea of Moses, even when he was very young. By faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his parents because they saw that the child was beautiful and they were not afraid of the king's edict. I mean, most of us probably have read through Hebrews chapter 11 because it's called the faith chapter. Many different people are shown as an example of faith. And a lot of times we say, okay, well, it starts with Noah and then kind of goes through to Abraham and talks about Moses and talks about a lot of other people. But do you know that Hebrews chapter 11, speaking about faith, does not only talk about Moses. This verse here says nothing about Moses. It's not about Moses. Who's it about? Well, because Moses was a baby, and he's not like when he was 3 months old, he was saying, hey, Mom, I got an idea. Maybe we should do this. And, oh, okay, Moses, great. You got great faith. No, this is the parents. Look, the faith of the parents, okay? By faith, Moses, when he was born, his parents are the ones who for 3 months took care of him. They kept him in the home. They tried to keep him quiet because there was now a law in Egypt. Because the Israelites were continuing to grow and the Egyptian leaders and the pharaohs were beginning to say, they are multiplying and they're so numerous and they're so powerful, they may eventually take over. They're going to flip the script. We're going to go from we're in charge and we're leading and we're the masters. They're the slaves, but if they get too powerful, they're going to take over and then they're going to be the masters. They're going to be in charge and we're going to end up as slaves or we may end up dead. And so they try to exterminate the population by killing the boys, the baby boys. When they were born, they were told that they needed to kill them. If we can kill the boys, then maybe we can stop this large group of people that are slaves also possibly becoming an army, keep it under control. That's Exodus chapter 1. But by the time you get to the end of Exodus chapter 1, it just wasn't working very well So they came up with a new way of saying, this is what we're going to do. When the baby boys are born, we're going to throw them into the Nile River, right? So again, that's how we're going to exterminate this growing population. But Moses' parents, look what they did. They kept Moses, the baby boy, in their home for 3 months. That's a challenge. Anybody here ever had a baby? There's some people who have recent babies. And maybe your baby's pretty good, right? Doesn't cry a lot. But baby boys, girls too, sometimes they cry, right? They cry when they're hungry. They cry when they're upset. They cry when they don't know what else to do. They're crying, when they need to be changed. They cry. They cry in the day. They cry at night. They cry all the time. I'm not saying they cry 24 hours a day, but they cry. Well, what do you do when a baby's crying? They're really loud. Because if the cry's too loud, then people are going to hear it. They're going to say, well, the soldier's going to say, Joe, did that sound like a baby to you? I thought I heard a baby cry. Did you hear a baby? Yeah, I heard a baby cry. Okay, what's going on? We're going to find this baby. This baby's not allowed to live. These are the laws. So they've got to somehow help this baby to live, to be quiet, to care for it, not tell anybody, keep him inside. They do whatever they can to keep him hidden. But they came up with an idea that instead of allowing him to die, we're going to let him live. How are they doing that? By faith. That's all it is, by faith, saying there's something that God wants us to do. All right? So the interesting thing here, with the parents who kept him hidden, the parents' name were Amram, and so if we look at the Hebrew word here, his mom's name was Jochebed. Now in Hebrew, it's not quite with the ja, it's a ya, Jochebed, right? So it's Yah. And what her name means is Yah, God, Jehovah, Yah. And the Obed is grace, God, grace, the grace of God, God's grace upon this woman. This woman is, hang on, what are we saying at the very beginning? God shows his grace, his power, his glory. God is glory. God's glory. It's not God's grace, it's God's glory. God's glory. When did Moses first see God's glory? His mother. That's her name. God's glory revealed to Moses. 3 months. But after 3 months, they decided, what are we going to do? We can't keep him like this hidden forever. So they thought, we'll do what we've been told to do. We're going to throw him in the Nile River. Well, he doesn't swim very well, a little young, so we'll make a basket, a little ark, a little boat that we can put him in. So they put him in a basket, an ark, a boat that would float on the water, put the baby in there, and left him there in the Nile River. Not really knowing what would happen, but what were they doing? By faith. They're trusting in God. They're trusting in God. Now, why would they do that? What was happening here? And this kind of came up in the reading today in Acts chapter 7 in verse 20. Look what it says. At this time, Moses was born, and this is Stephen kind of going through the history of all the things that God had done in the Old Testament. Moses was born. He was beautiful in God's sight. Now, God didn't look and go, wow, these two parents, they made a pretty good-looking baby. He could actually be on the cover of the magazine, right? No, it wasn't. He wasn't beautiful to look at. He was special. He was chosen. He was made for a purpose. Sometimes God does that. He makes people for a very specific purpose. As a matter of fact, you've been made for a purpose. Part of our problem in the world today is there's a lot of people walking around and they say, and I would say, look, you've been made in God's purpose. And they would say, I don't know what God's purpose for my life is. Well, maybe you need to start looking into that. You can study God's word. You can pray to God and say, God, why have you made me the way I am? Regardless of what my limitations are or my disabilities are or my, whether it be my intellect or something physical, something emotional, or something that's happened in my past, what does God want to do through me? But this is the idea that God has made Moses special. He's beautiful. He's prepared. He's perfect in God's sight for a perfect purpose that God has for him. Kind of like Jeremiah. Jeremiah would say, that he was created even before he was born for the purpose of being a prophet. God designed something special about Jeremiah. Now, God knew what kind of heart he would have, that he would follow. God knew what kind of person Moses would be, but before that, God knew what kind of parents Aram and Jochebed would be. And so, yes, chosen for a purpose, but have parents for a purpose. So he was brought up for 3 months in the father's house. Now look what we know about Moses. What do we know about Moses? Just before we read this, one more thing. Put the baby in the water. Moses had an older sister named Miriam. Now we know about her. Miriam must have been quite a bit older, like maybe a teenager, right? And so she's by the water, watching what's happening with the floating ark, the baby in it, Moses, her little brother, 3 months old. What's going to happen? Then Pharaoh's daughter comes down to the water to bathe with all of her people, sees this basket, and perhaps hears the baby crying, because when she took him out, the baby's crying, saw the basket, told her maidens, go get the basket, let's see what's in it, open it up, there's the baby, and she wants to keep the baby. She knows it's an Israelite baby, but she wants to keep. What are the odds of that happening? Like, that's illegal. But hey, when you're Pharaoh's daughter, sometimes you get away with stuff. So she decides to bring it home. I don't know what she would say to her dad. It's almost like, this is like a, Dad, I was out, and you know how a couple months ago I found like a lost puppy, and we brought it home, and it was okay, and we got the puppy? Well, I was out today, and I found a lost baby. Look at that, Can I bring him home, and, we'll raise him? But anyway, however it worked out, she ended up raising him. But when Miriam saw this happening, I don't know if it was planned out or God just intervened that way, that Miriam went up to Pharaoh's daughter and said, this is only a baby, and this baby needs somebody to take care of it, also needs, and what she would have said is something like this. Last time I checked, sometimes, on the grocery shelves, they run out of that pablum stuff. Yeah, that powder stuff that you put, milk, you know what you need? You need somebody who's got milk, right? Oh, can I get you somebody to do that? She says, well, go ahead. Go find somebody that can raise this child, kind of be a nanny as well as being a nurse to the baby. And Miriam's like, who should I get? Well, she knows who she's going to get, her mother. Hey, Mom, I got a job for you. You get to go and raise your own son. You'll be paid for it. Like, that's a pretty good deal. That's what happens. But we find this about Moses. By faith, Moses, so we're learning about Moses now, when he'd grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to be mistreated with God's people than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. I don't know how long Jochebed was with Moses. Could have been years. I mean, it could have been until he was 6 or 8 or 10 years old. We don't know when she was kind of let go from being the nanny to the baby. But let me ask you a question. If he was growing up in Pharaoh's palace, and if he was being, as the Bible would say, educated in all the ways of Egypt, who is telling Moses about Jehovah God? Who's telling Moses about the history of God's people? Who's telling Moses about the promises that were made to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob? Who's the one who told Moses about Joseph, who brought his family to Egypt, and that's how they got there? Who is telling Moses that he one day is going to have to choose? Is he going to be with the people of God, or is he going to be the people of the world? Who's telling Moses that you are God's man? You've been created for a purpose, and you've not been created for this world, and you've not been created for Egypt, and you may be able to learn, and you may be able to be the prince of Egypt, but you are a child of God. Who's teaching him that? It's not Egypt. It's not even Pharaoh's daughter. It's got to be his mother. There's no other answer for that question. How does he know? His mother taught him. Wow, that's a lot of responsibility, isn't it? Now, sometimes we may feel like, the world we're growing up in seems like a foreign land to us. Seems like we are just kind of in bondage to all the things going on in this world that they're taking over, and they're telling us the way we got to live, and they got to tell us the decisions we got to make, and all the moral consequences, and all the things that are happening, and the world is pressing in, even on our children. But you knew that before I told you. Well, who's going to turn the tide? Who's going to teach a different story? Who's going to teach a different history? Who's going to teach a different future to our children? And today it's not just the moms, it's maybe not just the dads. It may be the grandma and grandpas, the aunts and the uncles, the friends and family, maybe even church members, people that will tell the narrative, the story, the illustrations, the commands, the purpose of God for his children. I mean, wouldn't it be a different story if we told our own kids, you are not only my child, you're a child of God. I'm here to raise you not so that you can be like me. I'm here to raise you so you can become more like God. You're not here to choose my purpose. I'm not here to design your life and figure everything out for you. You've got to figure that out, but you've got to follow God. You are here to make God your Father. Be a part of the family of God. And this has got to be Jochebed who taught Moses these things that he could grow up to make that kind of decision. Even 40 years later, he still knew who he was. And Moses considered the reproach of Christ greater than the treasures of Egypt. It's kind of interesting, all the stuff that Jesus went through, all the persecution, the negativity, the rejection, the lies, the people that were speaking behind his back, the people that misunderstood him. Well, think about Moses' life. Even his own people didn't accept Moses right away, did they? They rejected him at 40 years old when he was going to try to set the people free. He wanted them to be liberated. He wanted them to be out of the bondage and to come into a relationship with God, instead of being in a relationship with the people of the land. But Moses was willing to go through a lot of suffering because he was looking forward to something better. He was looking forward to the reward. And Moses got the reward. And you may say, but Moses never got into the promised land. Well, the promised land was never his reward. His reward, as we say here, is heaven. He got into the eternal promised land. Now, because if you remember going into the promised land, I mean, it was the place of God. If the people did it right, it would have worked out well. But kind of going into the promised land and then being in the promised land never really worked out well for Israel, because they never really kept their end of a covenant with God. But by faith, Moses left Egypt. We would say he left the world behind. He left what people in the world would say, I would die to be in that position. To have that responsibility, to have that job, to have that relationship, to live in that palace, to have all that stuff, to be over people, to have power, to have, who's your daddy? My daddy's Pharaoh. He's the big guy, so you don't mess with me. You know what I mean? Who wouldn't want that? Moses. He says there's got to be something better than that. It's like, people in the world would say, well, he's crazy. He's lost his mind. Who would make that choice? I'm going to leave all that behind to go and follow something. I don't even know where I'm going. And I don't even know how it's going to work out. And I don't even have the directions. It's not even in the GPS yet. I don't know anything about this. Well, I'm going to follow God. Again, question. Who put that kind of faith in Moses? Where did he learn that? Learn from his mother. His mother. He's not afraid of the anger of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. So yeah, the king is very powerful, but we can see him. And actually, when you see somebody, what do you think? Well, somebody can take that guy out if they want to. Something can happen to that guy. He can fall over dead. He can get really sick. He can end up losing his mind. Someone else can take over. There's probably a good chance that when Moses went back to Egypt, Moses was 80 years old. So think about that. Moses started in Pharaoh's palace when he was 3 months, And assuming that Pharaoh at that time was probably 30, 40, 50 years old. I mean, you usually don't become a Pharaoh at 15. Probably an older guy. 80 years later, this may not even have been the same Pharaoh that would have been his daddy growing up. The next guy in line. But he went to that Pharaoh and said, you let these people go. These are God's people. We are going to go worship God, and you're going to let them go. And Pharaoh basically said, over my dead body. And Moses said, that can be arranged. And that's really what happened, right? So we're not going to go through the whole story, but what's he doing? Trusting in God. Those are major decisions that Moses is making, even later on in life. And so there is hope as God continues to work. God's working through mothers and fathers, grandma, grandpas, aunts and uncles, cousins, relatives, friends, church people. God's working in our lives to try to teach. Sometimes we say a younger generation. Maybe the younger generation are new Christians. I mean, somebody can be a younger generation, a new Christian at 70 years old, but they need to be brought up in Christ to learn and grow, to be strong in faith, to be able to make such decisions like Moses made. Maybe those mentors or people that are helping Christians that have been Christians a long time, but they're struggling. They're struggling with things of the world, decisions that are going on. Maybe they're just confused, or maybe they've just got caught up into an Egyptian world system. Or maybe they're young people in age. They're just starting out in life. And if they live in the culture of the world, there's not much hope. Unless someone's going to step in and say, we've got something better. We've got a better choice. We've got a better future. We have a better God. Don't make the things of the gods of this world. I mean, there was a lot of gods in Egypt. It's not the gods of Egypt. It's the God who created the world. You see, the Egyptians were a little bit confused because they did have many gods. One of the gods that they had was the Nile River. Why? Because the Nile River supplied life to them, because it's water. You need water to live. You need water to plant. You need water for your animals. Everything's about the Nile River, the God of the Nile. And you know what they thought we would do? Because you remember, they were going to kill the babies. Just kill them. That wasn't working. Instead of just killing them, what are we going to do? We are going to offer these Israelite baby boys to the God of the Nile. That's how we're going to worship the God of the Nile. Well, Jehovah is the one who made the Nile. He didn't want dead boys in the Nile. He wanted life. And so God is the one who's providing this through Moses' parents and through Moses, that it would be a different life. Moses' parents. Do you realize, out of all the people that left Egypt, the Israelites, there were many, many, many that were not faithful. Now, there's some that struggled, even because we talked about Miriam. And Miriam ended up being, kind of reading through the book of Exodus and Deuteronomy. She's a great example of a godly woman. Now, she had her mistakes. She's not perfect. And that's okay. I like reading about people that aren't perfect, because when they're perfect, it's like, I'm never going to be that. But hey, she makes mistakes. I made mistakes too. But maybe I can learn from her mistakes, but I'm going to learn from what she did well, Miriam. But then there was this other guy, Aaron. Well, who's Aaron? He's the high priest. He was made the leader of God's people in the spiritual worship. Okay, what are the odds that you read through the Old Testament, throughout all the days of Moses, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, and there's only 3 prevalent leaders among the people: Moses, Miriam, and Aaron? What are the odds? I don't know. I'm thinking Jochebed had a lot of influence in her children's life, and they became something great. Now, I'm going to close with this. Can I give you a word of encouragement? Because some of us have given our life to raise our kids. And before they were born, we were praying that they would grow up to be God's people. Some of us are not. They've learned and they've grown. They've been in church, they've been in Bible class, taught at home, given an example. In our case, by very imperfect parents, but trying our best. And there's still hope. We've not given up. God's able to do amazing things. And I know sometimes people may think, well, you must have done something wrong. You could have done it better. You don't really have anything to say or to speak into the lives of people. Can I just share something if you're in that situation like I am? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. On day 6, he created man and put him in the garden. And when you read through the genealogy of Christ in Luke chapter 3, the very last verse says, and Abraham, all the way down to Adam. And Adam was a son of God. And the last time I checked, Adam also transgressed against God. He was not faithful. And God was a perfect parent. So it's a challenge that we face. But we don't give up. We continue to pray. We continue to encourage. So I just want to say as an encouragement for those people that I know struggle with their own adult children, or maybe even their own adult grandchildren, there's still hope. God still can work. God is gracious and loving and powerful. And so we pray that he would work. So we're going to end with an invitation to say, if we can encourage you, I don't know where your heart's at. Maybe we can pray for you. Maybe there's people today that say, could the church pray for my family? Because I've said so many prayers. Could the church pray for me as a parent? I'm kind of really struggling right now. Can the church pray for me because I'm not where I ought to be as a Christian? Or maybe today you say, I want to become that child of God. I realize I don't want to be like Moses living in the palace of Egypt because I know there's something better. God's got a better plan for me, and that's that I would live in his kingdom and serving his purposes and doing something in the name of Christ. And if you want to surrender your life to him, saying, I'm ready to be a follower of Christ, to be a disciple, to give all that up so I can say no to the world, and I want to say yes to Jesus. And if today you want to be baptized into Christ, so your sins would be washed away. You receive God's Spirit to strengthen you and lead you and guide you. If we can encourage you, if we can pray with you, if we can be a blessing, let's stand. We'll sing this song softly and tenderly.